District 308 Board of Education meeting. Can I have a roll call, please?
Mrs. Doyle? She's not coming. Mr. Gatewood?
Present.
Mrs. Johnson?
Present.
Mrs. Kroner?
Here.
Dr. Marino?
Present.
Mrs. Simulton?
Present.
Mrs. Swanson?
Present. Pledge of Allegiance, right? Yep. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. On behalf of the Board of Education, I would like to thank the public for attending tonight's meeting. We value the feedback we receive from our residents and encourage everyone to take an active interest in their public school system. Residents interested in speaking to the board this evening are asked to have completed a comment card and presented it to the secretary to the board. When the secretary calls your name, I ask that you come to the microphone, state your name for the public record, and provide your feedback. Comments are limited to 3 minutes per person for a total of 30 minutes. Tonight, I will read up to 3 email comments at the beginning, with students, if any, being given the priority. These will be prioritized in the order they were received. Starting with our meeting in September, we will only be reading emailed comments that come in from our students. Should we have to restrict the number of attendees to meetings, this would change. No discussion of personnel matters or responses to questions are permitted. The board does not participate in discussion during public comment. Follow-up to your questions or concerns will be addressed by administration through the contact information provided on the comment card. Thank you. We have an email from Melanie McAllister. Dear Board of Education, hi, I appreciate you taking the time to listen to me about this topic. I am very concerned about the children in this school district. There has been an issue over at Boulder Hill Elementary School with the air conditioning not working in the building. This is a very serious safety issue that needs to be addressed. Right now, it's over 90 degrees and children are sweltering in their face masks at that building. They said it could take 2 weeks to get temporary air conditioning units. This is absolutely unacceptable. The children are very hot without air conditioning. This cannot go on much longer. Something needs to be done. Also, there was a letter sent out to the Brokaw preschool parents that they were delaying starting preschool by 5 days because of not having enough bus drivers. This is absolutely unacceptable because the majority of kids are at Brokaw preschool because they have an IEP or they are at-risk students. These are the children that have fallen behind even more academically by the pandemic, the IEP students and the at-risk students. And now you are planning to delay these kids getting access to preschool. That's incredibly troubling to me. It seems like you have not looked into other options at all, such as sending letters out to parents explaining the situation. Maybe they could drive their kids to preschool the first 5 days or carpool with another family. I also know that there are other elementary schools that maybe have 1 to 2 classrooms empty that could be used for preschool. Maybe there could be an email, a list of parents that could carpool. The other issue I wanted to bring up is you said there would only be 3 public comments per topic. However, last week you allowed 7 comments about the swimming coach and then only 3 people can talk about eliminating face masks. That's not fair. You need to have the same rules for everyone. You need to allow comments per topic and you are not following your own rules for public comment. You need to follow your own rules and listen to everyone's opinion, even opinions that are different than your own. Thank you. And this is from Anna Bosco. Please view the below linked presentation regarding the mandate of student masking There is extensive research data indicating conclusively that mask mandates are detrimental to students' learning capabilities and overall health. A study at a German university collected reports from 330 plus doctors and found 26,000 complaints from children wearing masks. They found that 68% of students reported adverse effects, including 50% increased anxiety, 40% increased of shortness of breath, panic attacks, facial rashes, dental disease, headaches, and more. There have been more COVID-related suicides in children than COVID deaths. I understand that the school mask mandates are handed down from the state at this time. I implore the school board of District 308 to join parents in fighting to reverse this harmful and unnecessary policy. Masks for children in school should be optional, to be decided by parents and students based on that student's individual needs. And there is a link, www.canva.com/design/DAEFTSHG6ZY/view. Thank you.
Michelle Traeger.
Good evening. My name is Michelle Traeger. I'm a parent in the district. I have 4 children in 308, high school level, junior high level, entering kindergartner. And my kids are students in special education, gifted education, and dual language. So when I see just one of the priorities for the Envision 308 takes care of like all my kids right there. But tonight I want to talk to you about next month being Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Disorder Awareness Month. And all of you have received emails from me at this point about this proposed legislation, the FASD Respect Act. I understand that as a school board, you may not be able to publicly advocate for that, but every single one of you as individuals should be contacting your legislators. We've already had productive discussions with aides from Senator Duckworth and Senator Durbin's office, and we also need to talk to our representatives. FASD is an invisible disability. Only 10% of students affected with it actually have the facial features that you might associate with alcohol exposure. Most of them have IQs in the normal range. However, their executive functioning dramatically reduces their ability to get through daily life without accommodations and support. The prevalence of FASD is estimated conservatively to be 1 in 20. That's 2.5 times the rate of autism, and we have a lot of kids in the STARS program in this district. 1 in 20 means every single one of our classrooms, every single playground, every single sports team has at least one student who is impacted by prenatal alcohol exposure. It cannot be outgrown. It's a lifelong disability. When I see the concerns about SEL and mental health, I think it's important to know about a 2019 study of the US adolescent population that was 17.2% for suicidal ideation and 2.4% for serious attempts. In the FASD population, it's 35.2% with suicidal ideation and 13% reporting at least one attempt in that year. People with FASD have 90% of them also have a comorbid mental health diagnosis. When I look at Envision 308, I want you to consider that success in your SEL and your professional development will not be successful unless you take into account FASD. In the pandemic, the rate of binge drinking by women of childbearing age went up 41%. So when you are considering Envision 308, what does that look like in 2026? You need to be thinking about the incoming kindergartners who have been impacted by FASD. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you. Is that all? Okay, thank you. Board member comments? Ruth?
I'll go. I just wanted to say that I'm happy that students and staff are back to school. I know my kids were actually excited to go back to school, which is, I think, a very common theme. And I know that just like any other school year, the first weeks can be a little rough in a few areas and there's some things to work out, but I'm confident that those things will be taken care of, and I'm hoping for a great school year with many positive things to come. And just thank you for all the hard work to all of our teachers who have just, I know they're excited to be back in their classrooms with students, and I appreciate all of their hard work and wish them great school years. I'm sure there will be some unique struggles this year, and I hope that they would reach out if there's any way that even I personally could support them. So.
Thank you. I'll just piggyback on Ruth here that I know as a parent, seeing my own children's smiles when they've gotten home from school has been amazing, and I did not realize how much we had lost really by not being in school, and just how much happier and alive they really are with being in school again. And so I'm really grateful that we've been able to make that happen. It has been really joyful, even just seeing the buses in in the community again. And I'm really grateful to our administration and staff for the around the clock work that I know you guys have put in to make this happen. I know that some things have happened outside of our control with air conditioning and things like that, but I know we're working on it, and that people are working on it around the clock, and just grateful that we're back in school, and grateful for all the hard work. Thank you. Latanya, do you want to? Okay, thank you. All right. If everyone's had a chance to speak, we'll move on to board committee reports. Okay, so Eugene, would you mind telling us about our first Finance and Facilities Advisory Committee meeting?
Yes, I can. It was a great meeting just to get to know all of the new members of the committee. We had an opportunity to go over the expectations of the Finance Facilities Committee, and we also had a chance to review even, I'll call it Finance 101 with Dr. Pesky. Was able to go through that just to help us to understand and to know and to even refresh us on the school district's finances and what to expect, so that when we're getting ready to make decisions, we'll understand the context in which those decisions are being made. And so we, after welcoming everybody within the committee, we're also still considering the 2020 plan for most of our facilities, many of them being built around the same time. So now we're working on doing assessments of all of our facilities to see what mechanicals or systems are at a critical need to be either fixed and or replaced, and then how do we accommodate that within the budget. And so we're also looking forward to Dr. Pesky, so I won't steal his thunder, for later on in the meeting, where he'll give an update on the proposed budget for upcoming year.
Thank you. Does the board have any questions for Eugene about the committee? Okay, over to you, Dr. Spartan.
Well, thank you, Dr. Marino. So good evening, board. As you all know, we welcome back over 17,000 students on August 18th. And we've had, as you said, we've had a great start to the school year. It was great to have our students back after 18 months of either remote or hybrid learning. On Wednesday, we had all of our district administrators out and about in the buildings, helping out the administration in any way they could. I had the opportunity to be at Oswego High School, where They welcomed students, the staff welcomed the students with the band playing and the cheerleaders cheerleading and the kids walking through the big inflatable panther, which was, it provided a very welcoming atmosphere. And I know all the schools did similar types of things, and that was very nice. As you know, School District 308 and school districts across our nation are dealing with a shortage of bus drivers. When we found out that just before school was about to start, that our service providers were not going to be able to provide or cover the routes, our transportation department worked around the clock to collapse routes and do their best to make sure we had transportation for the first day of school on August 18th, and they did an excellent job. We did have some delays and drop-offs on Wednesday. The team came back together on Wednesday night and made the adjustments for Thursday, and the drop-offs after school were much better. This past weekend, we had to make a difficult decision to delay the start of the early learning students until August 30th as we work out our transportation needs. And we sent out a communication to staff and parents of our early students on Saturday, informing them of the changes, and we will continue to communicate throughout the week once we have those routes and packages all set to go. Last Friday night at our high schools, we had Oswego High School had their annual Panther Fest, and here at Oswego East they had their annual Blue and Silver Bash. And I think I know a couple of you were able to attend some of those events. So if you had the opportunity to go to those events, I know you had a very good time, because they do the high schools do a very nice job of putting on a very friendly, family-friendly atmosphere. Last week I had the opportunity to meet with our student ambassadors, and I can say that they are very excited about joining the board on September 13th. And today I, along with Elizabeth Palatine and Andrew Godhealth, visited Boulder Hill Elementary School. As you know, the air conditioning is currently out at Boulder Hill. The district has installed portable units in all rooms, and along with box fans in all classrooms. As a matter of fact, when I was there, they had another 7 portable units that were dropped off. So we have some larger classrooms or larger areas where we're putting 2 of those units in the classes. The classes are warm. You know, the temperatures in the rooms range from 78 to 81 degrees while I was there. I was there about noon. I know in the morning it's cooler. At night we're drawing in the 60-degree air. But part of the issue is we're maintaining the ventilation, so the HVAC systems are continually going. So as the day warms up, it's pulling in cooler air as we're trying to keep those rooms cool as we continue to ventilate the school. The gymnasium air conditioning is working. That's a standalone unit, and I think my mic went off, did it? There we go. Okay. So the gymnasium is a standalone unit, so that's for physical education. The rooms are cool. The room is cool, and that also acts as a cooling center for the kids if the teachers need to bring them down. And I saw a lot of different classes that were out in the outside under the trees. They didn't seem to be bothering the kids, and the staff and everyone are dealing with the issue at hand as well as they can. They understand that we're waiting on a part to be fixed, and we're trying to expedite that arrival of that part as quickly as we can. I'd just like to thank everyone involved at the school, the building engineer, the district maintenance, everyone that's put in all the good work to ensure that they're as comfortable as can be. So as you can see, there's a lot of things happening around the district, and that is my report for this evening. So thank you.
Thank you. Can I get a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I make a motion to approve all items under consent, including 6.1 minutes from the August 9th, 2021 Board of Education meeting, open and closed session, the August 12th, 2021 Special Board of Education meeting, open and closed session, and 6.2 to acknowledge the FOIA requests received by the district.
Second. Mrs. Simulton? Aye. Dr. Marino?
Aye.
Mr. Gatewood?
Aye.
Mrs. Swanson?
Aye.
Mrs. Kroner?
Aye.
Mrs. Johnson?
Aye.
All right, item 7.1 is an annual intergovernmental agreement that is brought before the board. Tonight's agreement is in regards to the Kendall County Food Pantry and the school district. Are there any questions in regards to the agreement and what has been presented for the board for this evening for information?
I just had one question. This is a an older agreement, so we're just renewing, correct?
That's correct.
That was all I had.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions with that? All right. Item 7.2 is a recommendation of new board advisory committee members for the equity, policy and legislative, and teaching and learning committees. The board chairs have gone through the applicants and are recommending the new members to these committees. Are there any questions on this informational item? Okay, item 7.3 is the annual tentative budget presentation. Our Chief Financial Officer, Dr. Pesky, will be providing tonight's informational presentation. It's important to note that we do have the September 13th Board of Education meeting to answer any additional questions the board may have prior to us asking the board to approve the budget on September 27th. So with that, Dr. Pesky.
Thanks, Dr. Sparlin. Board of Education, I'm very happy to present this, my first tentative budget presentation to the School District 308 board members. I do want to acknowledge up there two things, that this was presented with a lot of help from folks in the finance department. Two of those key players were Debbie Smith, who works as our district bookkeeper, and Carrie Shambellin, who also assisted a great deal on this. Another thing to point out on the title slide, this is talking about what Eugene was talking about, a little bit of our Finance 101. And I think it's important to point some things out that I take for granted that maybe some new board members don't necessarily know. And for that fact, maybe some folks in the community. But up here, you'll notice it's just a little thing, but 2021, 2022, that's this school year that we're in. Some people don't necessarily know that FY22, this school year, we refer to it as fiscal year 22. So whatever school year we're in, the last year is the fiscal year we're currently in. So even though it's right now, August 2021, in the finance world, it's FY22. So I want to start off with the basic Finance 101. And the first thing is, what is the purpose of the budget? Why even have one? Well, number one, it's required by Illinois School Code. It also gives us the expending and taxing authority. So without a budget, we would not have those powers. It serves as a financial plan for our departments, the buildings, and the district. And more importantly, it's used as a management and communication tool for our district. I think it really shows how we align our financial resources with our human resources, and then more importantly with our educational programming, and how those three pieces come together. So the purpose of our budget, yeah, it's mandated, we have to have one, but it's also a great tool to show where our priorities are and how we meet those. So we have a couple budget requirements in that state mandate. It's number one there is we need to have a final budget. Number two, we need to allow, as a public body, we need to allow our public to actually look at it and see what we're doing. And then after they do that and we adopt it, there are some budget filing requirements. So the rules there are, we need to adopt it, the Board of Education needs to adopt it by the end of the first quarter of our district's fiscal year. Our fiscal year runs from July 1st to June 30th. So the end of that first quarter is September 30th. But before we adopt, before we adopt it, we need to put it on public display for 30 days so they can see it. The public can see it, look it over, and give us feedback. The budget must be on display for 30 days, and we need to let people know it's on display by publishing a notice in the newspaper that's circulated in the district. We'll be doing that in the Beacon News. It'll go out tomorrow, August 24th. So now we go back up to adopting it. On September 30th, we adopt it, and then we have to file it. So after September 30th, once we approve the budget, it needs to be filed with our county clerk within 30 days of adoption. So by the end of October. The budget also needs to be electronically submitted on the official ISBE forms within 30 days of being adopted through the Illinois State Board of Education. To help facilitate transparency, we will be posting the budget on the district website so people have access to it. It's also in board docs. And then we will send a copy of the final budget to the Regional Office of Education as well. What does that specifically mean, our calendar? This is a little repetitive, but just to show you, on August 16th, we met as the Board Finance and Facility Advisory Committee. We really talked more about that Education Finance Basics 101. Some of the information I'll share with you today. We did review some rough revenues and expenditures for FY22, and that's in more complete form today. So I'm excited to send this to the committee members so they can really digest this and give us some feedback. So that brings us to today, August 23rd. I'll be calling for a resolution to hold a public hearing on the FY22 tentative budget. The Board of Education will review it today. That's what I'm going to present here. And then we'll place it on display. I've got my folder here ready to go. Public display at the Board of Education office as well as our finance office so that people can look at it if they want to come see it in person. And it's got my contact information on there, so if anybody's got questions, they can follow up with me. And then on September 27th, which gives us 34 days, we'll have the public hearing. Once we close the public hearing, we'll go right into our Board of Education meeting. At the regular meeting of the Board of Education, I'll ask you to adopt the final fiscal year 22 budget. So now for a little bit of the Finance 101. So sit back and enjoy. Revenue highlights. We get our revenue from 3 different sources. The first one being local, the second is state, and the third is federal. But there's a lot of different local, federal, and state sources. So the first one is obviously we rely heavily on property taxes and the property tax extension. Later when we talk about the levy, I'll talk about how we calculate that. And basically you can see there, this year's budget was based on the 2020 CPI, the Consumer Price Index, which was in December 2020, it was 1.4%. So we use that number. But then we also use the 2021 tax levy. So we calculated that December of 2020. This year, when I'm done presenting this, I will start working on the levy and I will file that in December of 2021. The levy that I will bring to the board in either November or December will be for our next school year. So the life of a finance officer in education, we're always living in, right now I'm auditing and reviewing last year's budget. We're adopting this year's budget, and I'm already looking at estimating next year's budget. So we're living in 3 years. So sometimes it can be a little confusing. In addition to property taxes, we have what's called CPPRT, Corporate Personal Property Tax Replacement. If you were around in 1978, you know that our Illinois taxes were based on both income tax and personal property tax. Well, in 1978, they no longer did personal property taxes, and in 1979, they also canceled and suspended the need for corporate bodies to provide property wealth tax income as well. But to support that in the school systems, they came up with the CPPRT, which allows us to collect revenue based on the economic health of the state. We also have interest earnings. We collect registration, tuition, course, and athletic fees. We also collect fees for facility rentals and E-rate, and that's kind of all the local funds. The state revenue, there's evidence-based funding, which is our major source of state funding. We also have categorical grants, or sometimes you'll hear them called MCATs, for mandatory categoricals. That's things like transportation reimbursements, early childhood block grant, the special education reimbursements, tuition reimbursements, driver education reimbursements. So there's some revenue realized in reimbursements. And then finally, in the federal revenue, we have our participation in the National School Lunch Program. We also participate in several federal grants such as Title I, Title II, Title III, and Title IV. We get some federal IDEA, special education grant monies for both our regular ed or kindergarten through 22 years old, but we also get some dollars for preschool special education. We get Medicaid benefits, and this year, federal revenues we realized in the form of ESSER 2 and ESSER 3. The one thing I think it's important to point out with the ESSER grant dollars that we got due to COVID, they're reimbursement grants. So it's not really revenue, it's revenue to match expenditures due to the pandemic. So it's not like, hey, you got this extra money, you can put it towards your budget wherever you want. It's, you know, we paid for PPE, we paid for we're paying for some programs for learning loss. We have the ability to do some things with air quality. So it's not necessarily extra revenue, it's a reimbursement. Some expenditure highlights. Salaries are a huge cost for districts. Typically about 80% of our budget is salaries and benefits. Benefits include both TRS and IMRF. The TRS is for our certified employees contributing to the retirements, and IMRF is contributing to non-classified employees, teacher assistants, nurses, things of that nature. And then benefits also include medical, dental, and vision. But as well, other expenditures include purchase services, supplies, capital outlay, tuition, things like transportation, food services, private placement. We also have our utilities as a large cost. In our financial statements every month on the board, you'll see we have quite a hefty bill to pay every month. A lot of that bill is electricity, natural gas, phone, water, things of that nature, our internet connectivity. We also have lease payments and capital projects. So there's a basic way that we categorize our expenditures. So the job of a school district is, like I said, to really balance our revenue with our expenditures. Some of the challenges that we have in balancing that is evidence-based funding really started the conversation about what an adequate education looks like, and if we were adequately funded, how much would that cost? Well, right now, based on what the state has determined our adequacy target to be, we only meet that about 62%. So we need another 38% in budget and revenues to reach that level of adequacy. That's a lot of money. 62% of about $240 million. So we have a heavy reliance. This is an interesting one. It's what makes our district very unique, very special, but it also has its challenges. We're very reliant on residential properties. We are very much a residential district. We don't have a lot of corporate support for our educational program. We're about 71% of our property wealth is all in residential. So that's one thing that makes us unique, and we'll definitely talk about that more when we talk about levying and what that means in terms of our taxpayers and the cost of educating our students. Another thing is we are a tax cap district. That translates to our revenue being capped at CPI or 5%. I always get a kick out of the 5% because I can't remember the last time that we were at 5%. Way back years ago, 5%, it was like, wow, you know, we got to limit this somehow. But who knew that CPI would go down? And it's been down for quite a while. The number I quoted just a little bit ago is our revenues are capped. Whatever we got in property taxes last year, we can only get 1.4% more of that this year. So it's an interesting challenge. Some of the rising costs that we deal with, obviously we have annual increases in collective bargaining agreements. We have increased in special education populations, unfunded mandates, vendor contracts and transportation and food service, equipment and technology needs, and facility and maintenance repairs. So we have a lot of requests for our budgets on the revenues. The one thing I'm going to talk about today is very confusing. I'd like to straighten this out. There's a budget. Our budget is made up of 9 funds, and they're all listed up here, but there are 5 of those funds that carry most of our most of our transactions and the largest amount of our money. For instance, in the education fund, salaries and benefits, operations and maintenance, our facilities, transportation, IMRF and Social Security, and working cash, those are called the operating funds. So sometimes you'll say, wait, this says that our budget is $226 million in realized revenue, but over here it says it's $244 million. Why? How can that be? Well, the $226 million is in the operating funds. The additional $25 million is in the other funds, the debt service. The district does have debt. We have debt payments to pay off bonds. That's in the other funds. We have capital projects. We have tort, which is workers' compensation, student insurance, different district liability insurance is all paid through the tort fund. And we also have health, life, safety. So those are the 9 funds that we have, but today you're going to be hearing a lot about the operating funds, which is everything except debt service, capital projects, tort, and HLS, or health, life, safety. So with that, let me prepare. So thank you very much. I appreciate you guys entertaining my Finance 101, but that's kind of my finance. If you have other questions about basic finance, don't hesitate to reach out to me. But now I want to translate what that means in terms of dollars. So if you look up here, this is our FY22 revenue by source. And by source, I mean local, state, and federal. But it's only the operating funds. So you'll see we have $236 million, and you can see how much of that is local, how much of that is state, and how much of that is federal funding. So I gave you the numbers and the percentages on our revenue. There's another way to look at our revenue, very exciting. Let's look at that. It is called estimated revenue by fund. So rather than looking at it by local, state, and federal, I can say in the education fund, what funds are bringing in revenue? Our education funds through like our property tax levy. We end up realizing $196 million in revenue from different education funds. The operation and maintenance fund, we realize about $23 million. In transportation, we expect to see revenues of $9.3 million. In IMRF and Social Security, we'll see about $7.3 million. In our working cash fund, we'll see about $168,000. Working cash is kind of an interesting account. It's one of those accounts where we have a fund balance so that we can cover our cash flow. So if we are having a cash flow problem, we haven't received our revenue, but we still have to pay our bills every month, we can use our working cash fund to lend money to that account, and then we have to repay that repay the working cash fund from our dollars. It's like a way to internally loan ourselves money. So that's our revenues. I'd like to talk about our expenditures. How do we spend our money? If you see here, and again, I'm talking about the operating accounts. What we do, our education fund, we spend about $186 million. In the operations and maintenance fund, we'll be looking this year at spending about $23 million. In the transportation fund, we're looking at spending about $15 million. And in IMRF, Social Security, we'll be looking at spending about $6.3 million. I can already see maybe some of you might have a question there. Wait, John, your revenue fund was only $9 million. You're going to spend $15 million. We also, some of that, the transportation costs were reimbursed by about 80%. So we're balancing how much we spend and how much we need to spend versus how much we get reimbursed, and we try to balance that. But we do spend about 20% of about $10 million. 20%, $2 million is from local funds, and then the rest is reimbursed. So another way to look at operating funds is by what we call the objects. The object codes in finance are, as you can see there, salaries, which is about 65%. You can see that we've got our benefits, which are about 13%. So that's where we get our, 78, 82% of our funds are on salaries and benefits. You can see we've got purchase services, we've got supplies, capital outlay, other objects, and non-capitalized equipment. So that's another way to look at how are we spending our money. All of this is summarized in a lovely 30-page document that I would like to review with you at any time if you'd like to sit down. This is just a snapshot of basically the information I shared with you in the previous slides in the document that we call Budget at a Glance. But this information you can see, if you look across the top, you can see the 9 funds: education, operations maintenance, debt service, transportation. So it makes sense. We've got our beginning balances for the year. We've got our revenues, and then we have our different expenditure sources, and at the bottom we have how much money based on our budget and our revenue and expenditures, how much do we think we're going to have in our fund balances at the end of the year. Fund balances are kind of a funny thing. I'll talk about it on the next slide here. This is another page in the 30-page document from the ISBE. Basically what this is showing is the education fund, the operations and maintenance fund, transportation, and working cash. So 4 of the 5 operating funds. They left off IMRF for some reason in this one. So in those 4 funds, you can see what the total revenues are. You can see what the total expenditures are. And based on the money we receive this year and the money we spend this year, we are looking at having $3.2 million in a surplus. That surplus will go into our fund balance. Just as a little background information, most districts look to have it about a 20 to 25% fund balance. The reason that number is so important is it allows us to pay our bills with the cash flow. When do we get revenue and when do we have to spend it? We have some cash flow issues that we need to overcome. And a fund balance of 20 to 25% will allow us to pay that cash flow without having to borrow money, or what you guys have heard is tax anticipation warrants. So we're trying to remove that cost from our budget, but right now we don't have the fund balance to do it. Interesting thing here I'd like to point out, that $35 million on this page that says it's a fund balance, that's pretty healthy. I would be very happy if we had that kind of a fund balance all year long. The problem is, with the way cash flow works, this budget is a snapshot in time. So we are realizing revenue, but we need to pay our bills. We're also separating, and this is an unaudited number. So once the audit comes in, the auditors will separate what did we receive in June in our taxes, because some of that money needs to be credited to last budget year, and some of those June monies get credited into this year. So when the revenues come, where they're divided, that number will go up and down depending on where we are. Because we borrow money, tax anticipation warrants, those fund balances will go down to 0 at one point. We won't have any money, but then we'll look at building those back up by borrowing, and we hope to get to a healthy fund balance so we can get out of that need to borrow to pay our cash flow needs. And that, Board of Education, is, I think, my last slide. Yes. So I would like to entertain any questions that the board might have, and I will definitely put this on public display, and I will share with the board any feedback and comments I get from the public to share with you. And like Dr. Sparlin said, we do have one more meeting, September 13th. So if there are questions needing to be addressed, we can use that time as well. So any immediate feedback or questions?
I have 2 questions.
Haley.
So this comes up literally every year for probably the last 12 years. Can we at some point, if you look at slide 5,
The revenue highlights?
yeah, so in slide 5 you say registration, tuition costs, and athletic fees. Can we break those down? I know
Yeah.
that we say that every year, but every year at the beginning of the year, I got my $300 bill this year for, well, $600 if you count athletics and, but I guess what we're looking for is just kind of a breakdown, how much of the athletic fees actually goes towards athletics?
Yeah.
Or, and
Would
how
you,
much of the where's the registration fee get dispersed? Kind of, that's just,
Yeah.
it's a question that comes up.
I am absolutely swimming in numbers, and I have some of those numbers for you. So I will give you a very 50,000 foot overview.
Okay.
And I'll give them to you in terms of percentages.
Okay.
So registration fees, and you're right, I know as a parent myself in the district and having students in different athletic programs, you do wonder, where is this going? And were I not in the position I am, I have that same question in the position I'm in, but I'm in a position to answer that a little bit. So the initial answer to this is let's start with registration fees. Every parent who registers a student, kindergarten through 12th grade, pays a registration fee. Full day kindergarten pays a fee for full day kindergarten. All of our registration fees last year, we collected about $2 million. The cost to educate our students per pupil is anywhere, our instructional cost to educate a student is about $11,600. But if we add the operations, the building side too, then per pupil that breaks down to about $12,300. So if you look at that in percentages, the registration fees we collected is only 1% of what it costs the district to educate a child. Now, I know what you say. Some districts say, hey, it's only 1%. Can we just look at not charging? I mean, it's only 1%. It's almost nothing. That's why on this one, I did want to share with you 1% equals $2 million. So we've been really struggling to maintain that balanced budget, and we've made a really good strides the last few years. So now what you would be asking the district to do if we wanted to provide a no registration fee opportunity, I just need $2 million every year. So that's how the registration fees break down. So any questions on registration fees or any other? Yeah,
no,
Ruth.
no, but my question sort of, that's a good segue into it, is are we looking at having to make any budget cuts this year?
That's a bigger conversation. I think what I'd like to do is I'd like to get through this tentative budget conversation, and then I think we can entertain the idea of what I would like to do, and we'll see in Envision 308 in a little bit. One of the main finance goal is to maintain a balanced budget. Mm-hmm. So in that, I will be providing 5-year projections on an ongoing basis, and I want the board to know where we are financially based on our human resources and our educational programming, and if we want to do something different, we need to move the money around, or we need to look at making cuts. So I'm not in a position to say if we do or not, but I would look forward to having those conversations to say based on our revenues and expenditures and what we're doing, is that something the board wants to entertain? I will say, and I do know Dr. Sparrow and Faith can definitely comment on this a lot more. I think you guys have really been taxed with making a lot of cuts recently, and my concern is how much more can we cut without impacting the students in the classrooms.
Can I ask an opposite question? So in the budget and in the strategy that you're creating, and given that the residents are taxed with 71%, are there additional revenue sources that the district can consider, use, that would help bring additional revenue outside of the sources that you presented from state, federal, and local?
So number one in the Envision 308 goal is maintain a balanced budget by following up. I almost feel like I'm doing both presentations now. Goal number 1, 2, 3, 4 is, this one was put on there specifically by Dr. Sparlin. So he asked that we need to review, it's goal number 3, not number 4. Goal number 3 is explore ways to increase private and grant funding opportunities to allow for more educational improvements, not less. So in 5 years, that is a focus of ours. So when we talk about Envision 308, absolutely. So.
Eugene, a couple of years ago, we had a director, we talked about, and we had a director of development, and that person did fundraising and was working with advertising, and as Dr. Presky just said, private funding and bringing things together. But unfortunately, with COVID, that kind of dried up for a little bit of time, and that was one of the positions we cut. But in the future, when we're on a more financial stable ground, that's another position that we'd probably like to bring back.
Or listen, I don't want to get too far off that topic, but athletic fees.
Allie, I was coming back to you. I heard you the first time. But that was good. I appreciate you pausing, because with registration, those questions come out with just registration fees in general. With the athletics, again, I think it's fair to say that what the fees we collect are just a fraction of what the programs cost. So if we look at just the athletic programs at Oswego East and Oswego High School, all of the kids who participate in athletics, all of the kids that pay their, I think right now the cost is $300 per sport.
It is indeed.
And those dollars add up. And if you look at those revenues over the expenditures, those fees account for 39% of what the programs cost. So if it's $1 million to run athletics, $390,000 comes from revenue from fees, and $6.1 million is covered by the district local revenues, or state and federal. This comes from our revenue. So I do understand the concern that parents have, saying, well, where does that money go? The truth is, it's revenue that goes into the school district. But I think what we need to do is have a better accounting of those dollars. And actually, I sat down and with the athletic directors and with Dr. Sparlin, and they brought this to my attention. And I think they came up with a great idea. And that's, why not, instead of just giving an athletic budget from district revenues and then saying, well, we'll get the revenue somewhere and get these expenditures somewhere, why don't we allow the athletics department, and we did a little analysis of what their budgets have been, and what we found out is that the budgets for each high school, if we just let them have the registration fee and said the registration fees are their budget, it is a wash. The only thing that doesn't cover is the salaries. The district then has to pay the coaches' salaries and the referees and the officials and the transportation. That's where the other 6.1 million comes from, out of the fees cover about 39%. So I thought that was a really good idea, and we're going to try to look at implementing that next year.
All right, and then my last question was on slide 7.
Slide 7.
So I think I know that you kind of had it in small print, but to me, because I am also in this industry, like, I see unfunded mandates, and we all hear about unfunded mandates, but I'm not sure that everybody understands what they mean when we say unfunded mandates and how many there actually are.
You and I are on the same page. I went back and I took a look at this, and because I knew, that unfunded mandates, what does that mean? It's little words, but it's a huge impact. And so what I'd like to share with the board and the community is, since the year 2000, there have been over 130 new unfunded mandates. Things like requirements in special and physical education, lead testing, exams that are required in civics classes, concussion testing, suicide prevention. And I think the important thing to note here is that a lot of these concepts are really sound. They're really important. But I think what the unfunded mandates does is it puts the decision-making power in the hands of the legislators as opposed to the administrators, and doing that at a local level. So if the legislators make a mandate like that we can look at doing that, but that costs money, both financial and human. It takes someone time to do that, and program impact as well. We only have so much time in a day. So how do we meet all of this? A perfect example, Faith brought to my attention an unfunded mandate. It's called Senate Bill 0654. So it was just passed into law July 1st. What it says is that all public schools shall provide daily time for supervised, unstructured, child-directed play for all students, kindergartens through grade through 8. Specifics, further requirements that concerning playtime. This provides that the playtime shall not count as physical education, so no PE, and that it provides that the playtime shall be considered clock hours, so it's taking from the instructional day for the purposes of the code, and provides for the inclusion of students with disability, provides the public schools prohibit Well, the cost to this, it doesn't cost anything except time and supervision, because the teachers in their contract are given a certain amount of supervision time, and now they have a little less for unstructured supervised play. So that's another example of an unfunded mandate. A big one that Mr. Miller and I were talking about, Ken Miller, we were talking about the Affordable Care Act and the shifting of those costs to education and through states to education and the impact that that's had. So, like I said, since the year 2000, 130 unfunded mandates, sound ideas, but without dollars, it really taxes some schools. Ruth.
I just had a comment. You mentioned discussion about potentially changing the way we are using our athletic fees. And I just want you to keep this in mind as you're discussing that. Obviously, I know nothing has been decided at this point. And my concern is there are some sports that are cut sports and some that are no cut sports. And so you are limited in the number of students you are able to have on the team, and thus limiting the dollar amount you are bringing in to cover the fees for that sport. And with some, it might not, be a huge impact because there aren't maybe a lot of expenses, but others that are no cut, I don't know, I just am concerned that it's not going to be, I don't know if I want to use the word fair or
Equitable.
right. I mean, I think about cross country in the high school is a no cut sport. You can have 50 kids out for cross country. There are very little overhead expenses with cross country. I'm not saying there are zero, but compared to something like football or hockey or something that has a lot of equipment expenses, they use a lot more funds. That's a concern that I would have about moving in that direction.
If I could, that's a really good concern, Ruth. I think maybe it's definitely a question that we will take into consideration. I can only imagine when we have this conversation with our athletic directors that this is going to come up as well. But we are already funding athletics with a budget, and it's running. That program is running. And so now all we're saying is that the expenditures can remain the same and will be what they've always been. The difference is the revenue, rather than just saying, well, we just take it from state, local, federal. Now we'll just say, you know what? The fees that were paid are being allocated towards those expenditures. So we're not changing how we allocate it and who gets priority. We're saying we're going to still continue the successful athletic programs we have. We're just going to tell the public, hey, the fees you pay for athletics, that's what pays for these programs at 39%. The district's picking up the other 61. Does that help a little bit?
So one pot, not per
Okay,
sport.
hold on a second, Latanya
Yeah,
and
not
Jen
per
have
sport.
been-
You're just clarifying?
Clarifying.
Okay, yeah, I just have a statement, and then, so Dr. Petsky, and this just sticks in my craw, because we have been, borrowing money to pay our bills for so long that we just think it's normal, that that's what you do, right? And I want to get to the point where we're not doing that. And I know,
Yes.
As Eugene mentioned, there are things that, how are we looking to expand on our opportunities for revenues, but also when we get things like additional funds that Governor Pritzker, included in our evidence-based funding, like what are we doing with that money, and are we employing strategies like zero-based funding, to help in that regard?
Yeah, well, and first of all, you're exactly right. So to your first point, tax anticipation warrants or borrowing to pay our cash flow issues, we've been doing it for a little while, but it is mostly seen as a temporary solution when needed. But we've needed to do that because of our fund balances and the money we have in our reserves. So that's why it's so critical to build those reserves. We need about 20 to 25%, which is why in Envision 308, that number, we're really trying to hit that. Dr. Sparlin is aware of that. In our first conversation, that was one of the things he brought up. We need to take care of our financial situation. We need to not have to borrow money to pay our bills. So that is a priority. So we will do that. And I'm totally forgetting what your second question was.
Zero-based funding?
What's that?
Zero-based funding?
Yeah, and not
Budgeting.
necessarily
Zero-based
zero-based funding.
budgeting.
We call it zero-based budgeting.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
And that is definitely, some districts do incremental budgeting. So they just say, hey, you had $10 last year, you get 2% more, you get 12 this year, and they just grow it. Other districts do line item budgeting. They actually go through every line and they say, do you need this? Yes or no? Keep it, cut it. And then there's zero-based, where you take everyone back to no money and you have them build that budget up. There is a fine line between needing to go totally zero-based and going to line item, incremental, and just looking at how are we spending our money. So we are definitely looking at all of those different approaches to budgeting, and the answer to your question is yes. We will be considering zero-based budgeting where appropriate. Some things, it's not needed because we do have leasing costs, we do have internet costs, we've got utility bills, a large portion of our budget, well, salaries, things of that nature. But when it comes to the rest of our, for instance, the salaries and benefits alone are 80%. So we basically have 20% of our revenues to use for all other educational, operational purposes. So that 20% we can go through. We have a lot of flexibility there.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I would like to, first of all, just to touch again, because LaTanya said exactly what I was thinking. But the reason the tax warrants are an issue is because we pay interest heavily on them, and that's money that we can't use in other places. So I think that's a very important distinction, and why it's such a goal for the district, and something that I know myself and some of the newer board members were campaigning on. So I think that's really important.
And if I don't know if it's appropriate or not, but the numbers are in there. If you go in here, this is going to be on public display tomorrow. And if anyone knows what page to turn to, I've budgeted for the interest, or the payments on interest on the dollars. I budgeted $200,000.
And you look
which
at
is
that
about
compound
1%.
when you look at that compound effect over the last few years that we've needed to do it, it's really put some strangleholds on what we've been able to do and what we want to do in such things as like Envision 308.
Yeah.
Another thing, and as a
HR while you're talking about that too, just to answer that, it's also that $200,000, it's not yes or no, it's how much do we need to borrow for cash flow.
Right.
This year we had to borrow $25 million to cover a couple months. Right. We ended up, and we were watching those dollars closely. We just happened to get revenue in, so we could pay it off in June and not July.
Early, and
we saved $25,000 in interest for 1 month on that $25 million. So I think what we can do as a board and as a business office, let's really do a solid cash flow and know how much money do we need right now, and do we have enough, or are we over borrowing? And that's a question we need to know. I don't think we're over borrowing. I think we know our cash flow pretty well, but I've not done it in this district before. I will definitely communicate to the board on what our borrowing needs are with a good cash flow analysis.
And I think sometimes we have to, it's very hard, especially with COVID, it was very hard for us to look ahead, but I think that it's incumbent upon us to look to the future as current board members. Two other things that I just wanted to address. We, during COVID, did receive a pretty decent sized grant for technology. Can you just give me a little bit of background on page, I don't know, I think, it's this page, rising costs with equipment and technology needs, and kind of what that entails?
Yeah, and Faith can fill in too a little bit. That was the digital equity grant. We got, I want to say it was like $1.1 million in the digital equity grant to prepare for remote learning. Faith.
I think you were asking more about what the costs and things are. So some of the delays that we've been putting off as we've had other budget cuts in other areas, projectors in all of our classrooms. If you've gone to the junior high classrooms or the elementaries, if you sit in the back, it's kind of hard to see because things are fading, and we're working on replacing all of that. There were access points and things that needed to be addressed. And I think there was a plan in place, but there wasn't money at the time, so difficult decisions were made about putting off some of those things. Now, as more has been put off, there is a kind of a snowball effect of what we need to do to even catch up and maintain the technology we have, more or less advancing into new types of technology that we really need to look into to better instruction. So kind of a combination on those rising costs are some of the maintenance, and as like the light bulbs from projectors only have a shelf life of so far, you need to replace all of those. Our Chromebooks and those things only have a life of 4 to 5 years, so they need to be refreshed. And while the cost of a Chromebook is going down, there are other kinds of technology that are really adding to that cost.
Okay, thank you for that. And then just, it's one last comment more than anything, is I know we have quite a few openings in the school district, and from the HR side of things, that really also affects us financially, because if those positions are not staffed, we then have to sometimes contract them out at a higher price than we might need to. So as we move into this new school year, getting those staffing positions solidified is going to be very important and helpful for not only our current staff, who are doing more than their fair share, but also it will help us from a financial standpoint as well.
And can I add to that, that if we are maintaining those that we employ, we're spending less money, because if we're training people and then they're leaving, then there's cost there as well.
Huge.
So
Yeah.
making sure that we're creating a culture where people want to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Petsky.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate the conversation, board. So I look forward to more conversation.
I have one
Oh,
quick
except,
question.
and here we go, more conversation. Donna.
Because I know that the community is often curious, because so much of our education fund goes towards salaries and benefits. Can you just share with us, how do we compare with other districts? Are our percentages roughly the same, or?
You know, I've been meeting with Mr. Miller in the HR department, and that's one of the tasks that we're poised on right now. It was revenues, expenditures, ESSER grant funding, budgeting, looking at what the impact has been on. So I honestly have not done that comparison yet, and I think that comparison may change a little bit. We'll be looking at collective bargaining agreements and increases and negotiations, but I see that is definitely an activity that we will, Ken Miller and myself will be engaged in.
Okay.
It's an important part. Like you said, it's 80% of our salaries 80% of our budget is salaries and benefits. So we need to make sure that we are providing enough in that area.
Dr. Marino, to answer your question a little bit, if you look at our instructional spending and our operational spending per child, we're well below the state average. And Dr. Petsky, in the update, this week's update, he can provide those dollars. Because if you take that difference between what it costs us to educate and what the average cost is for the state, and you multiply that times 17,000 kids, you come up with millions and millions and millions of dollars that we spend less to educate our kids here in 308.
Right, and I just want to be clear that I know that our salaries are lower than other districts, but I know that it is a common question of our community as to, when they see our budget, it is alarming for parents to see that, that much of the budget. So just asking the question as to, are other districts, like, is that common that it's 80% goes to your?
Yeah, those are state
everyone.
averages. So when I quote that 80%, it's actually 78 to 85%. That is an Illinois school budget, is salaries and benefits in that range. So we are not out of the ordinary, but I do like Dr. Sparlin's idea. I can give the board a quick update just by using the per pupil expenditures instructionally, and then we don't have to dig through all the contracts. We can just tell you, how do we compare on our spending. That'll give you a really good picture. So good idea.
Yeah.
And I think it's important, Dr. Marino, and everyone to know that any company, whether it's a business or a company or a school district, their line item for salaries and benefits will always be the majority. So in the business world, we see like a 70-30. And then in education, because you have to have so many staff members per student, you're always going to see it be a little bit higher too. But what I think is very interesting is as you asked, breaking it down so people understand why it is that amount of money. So I appreciate that comment very much.
And what the norms are.
Right.
So that's what I was, thank you. Are there any further questions or comments for Dr. Petsky?
I would be interested, just the comment that Dr. Sparlin made regarding we spend a lot less per pupil than the average, but how are we performing in terms of the average? That's, you don't have to answer it, just a question that.
Yeah, I think that would be a later topic, but a good question. Okay, so shall we move on?
We shall.
Thank you.
All right. Item 7.4 is in regards to our developing our 5-year strategic plan and Vision 308. So developing a 5-year strategic plan is a process, and tonight we are happy to share the next step in that process. As you know, the board had previously approved the one-page document that is divided into 4 sections. So Faith, if you could click to the second slide, please. And those four sections are student learning, support for student learning, finance, and facilities and community partnerships. Within each one of those 4 categories, the board and administration have identified specific objectives that our work will be focused on over the next 5 years. The first half of tonight's presentation shows each individual objective from each of those 4 quadrants, along with what we've identified success to look like over the next 5 years. The second half of the presentation shows the work that will happen between this year and 2026 for each objective of the plan. Tonight is an overview of what success will look like at the end of 5 years and highlights the work that will be done to accomplish those tasks. The details of the plan to accomplish what we present will be shared with staff and with you along the way. We are happy and excited to be presenting our 5-year strategic plan with the targeted objectives to accomplish our work, and we look forward to the feedback from the board on tonight's presentation.
All right, I think it's my turn to talk here a little bit. Really excited to talk about this with you. I have Heidi Pajacek, who's also going to talk through, and I know Dr. Petsky is also going to help out, but there's a cast of thousands that went into this. So there are lots of people to thank along the way. Lots of the statements that were in here were a team effort, and then we took all of the success indicators to our whole admin team, principals, assistant principals, district office, maintenance, everybody on August 6th, and got some of their feedback on those pieces as well. So what we're going to go through tonight is a real team effort with everybody thinking about where do we want to be by 2026. So as Dr. Sparlin said, we're going to start off with the student learning pieces. And all of the things in blue there are the statements that we've already approved that are from those 4 quadrants, and the yellow tan piece is what are some of the broad brushstrokes of what are we going to see when we get to success, because we really have to agree on what are some of the things that we want to have accomplished. So the very first one, improving literacy in math and going through what that looks like. We've written math and literacy frameworks, but we want to implement them. That means new staff coming in. It really becomes our way of doing business and instructing math and literacy. We need to have data systems in place to monitor the effectiveness, which includes classroom walkthroughs. And we want to see the percent of students meeting expectations at least up 10% in both literacy and math, and that would be on state tests.
The second priority focuses on the social, emotional, and behavioral development and wellness of our students. By 2026, we will have social emotional learning curriculum in place, early childhood through 12th grade, that reflects the Illinois state learning standards for social emotional learning, but is also, I think, most importantly, reinforced through our academic content area classes. So we're taking those Illinois state learning standards and we're applying them to every content class that the students experience throughout their day. We also will have a comprehensive system of intervention developed for behavior and social emotional wellness for students, and most importantly, a way to measure the effectiveness of both that curriculum and the interventions.
Going on, one of the pieces that we want to do is to have more choice and challenge, which means the chance for success and personalization in instruction. So some of the things we'll be looking for by 2026 is really that differentiation, especially in literacy instruction. And then we will be using administrator and teacher surveys to see how that improvement is happening. And part of this piece is also making sure that our staff development models the type of instruction that we want, which includes staff development that has differentiation and choice and challenge for our staff. Looking at the next piece for creativity and what that looks like, we want to have more opportunities for our students to problem solve and creativity. If you've heard my soapbox before, we can't just be dumping curriculum into people's minds so that they answer what Siri can answer very quickly. So we want to have more examples of that, and we will include specific examples with new coursework as we go along and have a accumulated list of where we are going with creativity and problem solving. A next piece that was very important as we made our rounds in Vision 308 listening sessions was the inclusion of financial and digital literacy. By 2026, we want to have new K through 12 social studies curriculum that includes financial literacy, and that's at all levels, elementary, junior high, and high school, and then have redone our high school courses to incorporate digital literacy skills among them. The last piece is on K-8 assessments, and while we do want to reduce that time, we also need to get much better at utilizing that data. So we want to have annual reports to the board on student achievement that include both the aggregate, but even more importantly, disaggregating the data into student groups so that we can look at celebrations and plans for improvement based on that data. We really want all of our schools to use that process as well, so we are starting a district team to model that process and then use it at the school level as well. Then going on to the next page, and it's not, there it goes. We also want to look at all of the equity statements that we will soon be talking about with the board, and want to have annual feedback on those to identify celebrations as well as areas for continued improvement. Another key piece of that is looking at the recruitment and retaining for our staff. And we want to look at reducing the discretionary turnover on that by 10% in all the different areas, teachers, administrators, teachers' assistants. Then we want to keep track of the demographics of newly hired teachers and administrators and see where they fall in different subgroups by those people that are graduating and are available for hire.
When we think about safe and nurturing learning environments for students, we often focus on physical safety, but as a district, we want to also make sure that we are focusing on the mental and social emotional wellness of our students and defining safety in that way. We want to make sure that all of our staff are trained in different strategies for supporting that mental and social emotional wellness of their students, but also allow students to have the opportunity to learn different skills and strategies that will support their own mental and social emotional safety as they grow and develop, and also support that of their peers so that they're seeing themselves within that community. Often students are really well aware of the mental and social emotional well-being of their peers, sometimes before we are as adults, and it's important that we equip them with different strategies in order to support that as well.
Along with this will need to be a lot of professional development for staff, so we want to have not only an annual plan that shows that at a glance, but a 3-year plan. As you can see, all the different components of Vision 308, it'll have to be some parts of the training coming this year, some parts coming at later pieces. And again, extremely important that the professional development we provide to staff models the type of instruction that we want to see for students with differentiation and choice. The next piece is something I'm really excited about, the vision of the future of instruction. And what I mean by that is getting people together and talking about, look at this year's kindergartners and predicting out what is the world really going to expect of them and what does that need. In education, sometimes we don't slow down enough to do that, and yet we really need to look into the future skills that are needed, have forward planning, and then think about our technology purchases and our curriculum and instruction to align with that. And then looking at the next piece, we really want to have our students and our staff working on this inclusion piece if people don't feel included in the community, they can't learn at their most. So we're looking at annual surveys and an interview process to gain feedback from students on how we're doing on that. Then the next piece is all about special education, English learner services, and gifted students. And we want to go through in our special education pieces and look through not only for the academic but the behavioral and the social emotional outcomes, look at data, and then having building-based teams and administration to help out with the oversight of that. We realize we need to look at the whole comprehensive English learner program and look at continual improvement and what that looks like and get into data on how effectiveness that is. And then a big push from our community also was to review the gifted program to identify strengths and opportunities for improvement. And that plan is part of 2026 as well. All right, I'm going to take a break and hand it over to Finance and Facilities.
So for finance and facilities, we've got 5 priorities this year. One we talked about is maintaining a balanced budget. I think the big thing to know is a budget is a plan. It's a living and breathing document. And if we just adopt it and don't monitor it throughout the year, it's not going to do us any good. So we will maintain regular updates. And communication on our 5-year projections, as well as our we'll provide you financial reports at the board meeting to talk about our monthly spending and revenues. Again, a huge focus on building 20%. Both Jennifer and Latanya commented today about our need to borrow money for cash flow purposes. That 20% number will put us in a position where we hope that we will not have to do that. So we'll report regularly on the update operating fund reserves, and that will be built into part of our current 5-year projections as well. We're currently at about a 10.5% fund balance. When you look at that throughout the year, we really need to be up to 20%. Dr. Sparlin would like us to explore ways to increase private and grant funding. I think he talked about we do look at different opportunities, and we're always looking for ways to increase our revenue, and we will continue to do that through the business office and through teaching and learning, and wherever there's an opportunity, we will gladly welcome that. I think to start the conversations there really easily with our education foundation and things of that nature, there's a lot of opportunity there. We also, so the first 3 goals are really financial, and the last 2 goals are really the facilities portion. It's something we need to look at. Eugene talked about, we do have a plan called the Vision 2020. It was Vision 2020, it was created in 2014-15, so that was 5 years ago. We need to look at what did we do and what did we not have the money to do. And while there are some things in that plan that weren't done, there are other priorities that have been added to that. So we've been working to audit, Rob and I, our facilities and find out the major systems and things like that. So we will have that plan for the board, and then we will develop that 5-year plan to address those the physical capacity of our building and program needs. So Brokaw, the transition center. And you can see there the end goal. What we hope to see is that solutions have been developed to identify space for our projected enrollment needs, our program needs, and make sure that the solutions are carried out in a timely way to address those space concerns in our educational environments.
Thank you. Now we're going to go to community partnerships, and it will be extremely important that we continue to have feedback, not only from our students, but parents, committees, all of those pieces. So we will continue to bring new plans and communication on a Vision 308 and have that be part of the process as well.
So the work of a school happens with our internal resources, but it also happens through beneficial partnerships with a variety of different community resources and stakeholders, including mental health agencies, businesses, universities, et cetera, et cetera. So by 2026, we want to have expanded our partnerships with a variety of different stakeholders within the community. We want to make sure we have those partnerships published and accessible with information for all of the community and our staff, students within the district, and continue to analyze the work that we're doing within our district, and then how I continue to identify new partnerships that are beneficial both to that outside agency and the district as a whole. We are looking at developing our family engagement strategies, so really expanding our opportunities for parent education, for family engagement, and for parent groups and meeting schedules, and making sure that, again, we have an avenue and a vehicle for communicating all of that information with our families, and that we continue to grow those opportunities as our community needs change. And then I think one of the most important pieces of community engagement is having all of our stakeholders feel connected to our district, feel that they are a part of the positive growth and development of both our students' performance as well as kind of the school as a central hub to the community. I think that's we are a place, we are our largest employer, but we are also a place where we bring together large groups of people. And so by 2026, we hope to see a variety of people with different backgrounds engaged in a lot of different community events that are housed and centralized through the school district, and that those showcase the positive relationships that we have. We'd also like to develop an alumni program and continue to honor those who began in our community and stayed within our school community.
And finally, by 2026 and sooner, but we want to have a dashboard and a calendar of reports. So we're looking at measurable data, but also reports that would be shared back to the community to build trust and to build collaboration and communication over where we're going by 2026. I was asked to really kind of pare down because I know this is a lot of information. So I'm not going to go through every single slide that's about to happen, but hopefully you had a time to look at it. But we thought it would be key for you to see that we're going to break down each of the 5 years. It's human nature as well as district nature to say either we're going to do it all the first year or we're going to put it off 4 years from now. And it became really apparent, because this is an enormous amount of work, that we really have to prioritize what are we going to do the first year, what are we going to kind of pump the brakes a little bit and not start in depth until 2 years from now. Just if you think about the amount of professional development with our teachers, you can't do all of that in 1 year. Pieces will have to break down. So I just picked 2 to kind of highlight some of the things for 21-22. So now I'm back to that improved literacy and math achievement, and the things that we want to do this year, for example, is train all of our kindergarten through 8th grade staff on the frameworks. We're going to be conducting walkthroughs and staff surveys to determine professional development needs. We're utilizing our coaches to get in and look at what are the best practices in instruction and differentiate for our staff, because some of them are already rock stars at some of this and some of them need additional help. And then really build that professional development plan for long-term of what needs to be done. And then you'll see the different steps as we get there. Then the next one that I want to highlight, and it's not getting there. It's thinking about it. Slide 13. My clicker's not, there it goes. Maybe. All right. So in looking at our assessment system and where we're at with that, if you look at 21-22, we want to and switch to FastBridge, which we did for this year, and that'll allow us to spend a little bit less time on assessment, but give us some richer data. And then we really need to dive in and create training and the use of this data, and some of that's coming out here in the next couple of weeks, on how to use that academic data, not only to identify students with interventions, but even more importantly, to identify the successes and the opportunities for improvement in our instruction, and then create professional development that goes along with that. We'll be creating a district improvement team. We've had our very first meeting to go through and model that practice, but also to look at the district as a whole and look at our data and identify areas of weakness. And we'll press and repeat that several times throughout a school year and many, many times over the next 5 years. That was a lot, and I know I talk really fast because I have so much to talk about. if we get all the way to the end of this, it talks about next steps. And we want to bring this back on September 13th and talk about that. And then we want to show a dashboard at that point of what a mock-up could be of how we will chart our progress, and share those pieces and get input from you all so that we could start on this journey. I want to remind everyone that while we have these 5 years, you saw that the columns, the words became a little less as we got to 25, 26. That's because we have to build that. So if you think about a long journey, what's right up in front of you, there's a lot of details, but what's far away, we'll be adding more details and putting those pieces each year that we go in and updating those plans. What questions do you have? Yes.
2 questions.
Did you raise your hand too? I'm raising my hand.
We're all raising.
So my first one is, it may be rhetorical, or maybe not, but what do you need in order to accomplish all that you presented? Thinking about time, talent, resources, people, money. What do you need in order to do that? And I'm going to give a second question because it may answer it.
Okay.
And within the assessment, I'm glad you used that one as an example. You said that the bridge, is it Fast Bridge?
Fast Bridge
Gives you richer data. And so what else will be used to determine student achievement? And does this new system, the richer data within this new system, encapsulate all the data that's going to be needed to determine if we're being successful in everything you just presented?
That was a really big question. I think I'll tackle the data one first.
Okay.
So FastBridge is a K through 8. It doesn't go to the high school level, and we are instituting some new assessments at the high school level this year too. And what FastBridge does, it's basics of literacy and math instruction, and it starts all the way down at 2nd grade, and there are some pieces at 1st. And it will tell us what standards in broad brushstrokes students have mastered, and it's an adaptive test so that it zooms forward if a student is answering a lot of questions correctly, or it backs up grade level if the student is not making a lot of progress. So we'll get kind of that, as especially this year we're expecting a wide variety of achievement, even more so than in the past. You asked if that's enough data to determine that.
Or really the right data is what I'm trying to figure out.
So on the right data, on basics of reading and math, yes, but there's a lot more to student learning than what can be answered in a multiple choice test. So when we're looking at writing, when we're looking at creativity and problem solving, some of those pieces are incredibly important. I would even say resilience is going to be a big factor on how our students will succeed. But if you're looking at indicators for how we will do on future reading and math assessments, yes, I believe that FastBridge is a tool that will be very, very helpful in that. My background in elementary also says we really need to look at kindergarten and 1st grade on letter recognition, letter sounds, sight words, which will be things that we already keep data on but aren't part of FastBridge, is we have to make sure that our students have those basic building blocks. Everything else relies on that.
All right, so just one last comment and I'll pass it. So based on what you just said, my recommendation would be, because the question is what else will we use to determine student achievement? If we're only using that test, everything that you presented is really good, and I think it's needed in order to determine not only if a child is successful, will be successful, because we gotta project future success, the ability or capacity of future success, but I'm just not sure that assessment will tell us that. And if it doesn't, then how will we determine if everything else we're doing is actually working, so that if we need to course correct after a year or 2 years, we can say, yes, this is working, no, it is not, but then according to what? So if we don't have the right data, then some of our efforts, we may put a lot of time, talent, resources, money, and people into it and not know for 10 years if it's working.
Right, and when you look at curriculum and instruction, it's not only the assessment that you need to know whether or not it's working, it's also whether people are doing the instruction that we are hoping they're doing.
Right, so how do we assess that?
So we have a system of classroom walkthroughs that we're starting this year, where there are a team of us from the district office as well as district administrators, and we've built a schedule to go visit classrooms, and I'm having principals and assistant principals, not from their own school, but come with me to other schools so we can talk and talk about instruction where it's not necessarily their building, and build common understandings what that would be, and then they will model that process and go back and use that. Because, and Dr. Sproul, I know you told me to be brief, but I get going.
Quite all right.
On
Quite all
this,
right.
for example, and I use my chocolate diet thing all the time. So if I tell the doctor, hey, I'm going to lose weight because I really, you know, I'm going to lay off my chocolate, but I never lay off my chocolate. And he comes back and he's like, your chocolate diet thing didn't work. You haven't lost any weight. Well, it wasn't the chocolate diet, it was the implementation of that. So we have to make sure when we put the literacy and math framework in, before we would change course, because the data doesn't look like it, we'd have to make sure that we're actually doing the literacy and the math framework pieces.
Agreed.
Right.
Okay.
You also asked me what I need.
A fairy godmother.
Time, but we don't really have that. We have to get in and we have to do it. A culture and a climate that supports, but also talks about a sense of urgency, that builds on people's successes and positives, and that's staff and students, but not to the extent of we're all good. We're good, but we can get better. If we can set that climate and that culture, that's the biggest thing that needs to happen in order to make all of this work. We also need staff. We also need money to redo curriculum. We also need professional development. We all need all of those things, but that culture and building a sense of trust where we have clear expectations, and we are really clear about where we're going and what we want to do, and we support people, that's what's needed to make this happen the most.
Okay.
Go ahead, Tanya.
Thank you. So in addressing equity and inclusion and climate, we know that children, students, they want to see themselves in the classroom, right? And we know that, curriculum is a really big part of them seeing themselves. And so what is curriculum renewal in this process, and where is it in the process? Is it going to happen this year? Is it 2, 3, 4, 5 down the road? And then what do you need in order for curriculum renewal to be, a priority?
As we talked about the social studies standards, for example, that are in here of what we're doing, and that's one of the main pieces. We are behind in having our social studies standards. That's one of the things that, because of budget cuts, we've continually said we'll push that down the road. So we need to get in and do that, and the curriculum review process that I've been working with high school assistant principals, and as well as our elementary and our junior high directors, has a very big part of that process of creating the lens for things such as equity, but also in differentiation materials, also those pieces. So whatever resource or tool we look at, we've got an established list ahead of time that we believe has to be addressed and looked at, not which book did you like or which materials did you like, but these are, I'm really full of bringing all the faithisms out tonight. These are the truths that we hold self-evident about curriculum and instruction. That's something I talk about with my team all the time. And we need to get in, and we've been pushing that off for a long time. We have high school textbooks that are tremendously out of date. And we had difficult decisions just yesterday in Dr. Sparlin's office about budget and where we go with those pieces. But know that the social studies materials, when you're talking about equity, are one of the large area of concerns that we are working on, and then we allocated some of our ESSER monies to providing more materials for our novels and for our libraries and level libraries at the elementary to include more cultures and more diverse perspectives and literature that's available to that. And when you look at our literacy framework, a lot of that is having student selected texts and being part of that where they have choice, so that you're having a wide variety for people and students to choose books that reflect the characters and the people that they're interested in while they're trying to tackle and learn new reading material. Is that what you were looking for?
Well, I just want to make sure it's going to be a priority.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And if we, with the Teaching and Learning Committee, and I know we haven't met yet, one of the things I want to do with that committee is go through the curriculum review process that we've been drafting and writing, so that we have an agreement ahead of time on the types of lens and tools that we're looking at.
Mm-hmm. And so we've been putting it off because we didn't have the dollars, right?
Correct.
Do we have the dollars now?
Right now, we have the dollars written into the budget for elementary social studies choice and selection this year. And then we have put in money for the year after that, and we've already started the process with the high school department chairs around science and social studies. We already met in August to start that process because it has been not done for so long. It's going to take quite a bit of time to overhaul science and social studies at the secondary level. So it'll be a 2-year process to get our social studies courses and curriculum where it needs to be, but we've already started.
Thank you.
One quick question, if you don't mind, Jen, before you go. Sorry.
Sure.
How long does that translate into actually seeing it in the classroom?
So one of the things for social studies that we talk about, and part of the process in the state of Illinois is you have to bring the tools to the board. It has to be on public display for 30 days. So when we are looking at social studies and we have that item in the budget for elementary, that isn't a start until next school year. So we would be piloting, looking through things this year, posting, bringing it to the board in the spring, training teachers in May. Hopefully we have all those materials, and then starting that. And then 2 years from now, we might have a few courses at the high school levels before them, but looking at a 2-year process to get our science and social studies where it needs to be at secondary.
Yeah, the budget you just heard and the presentation here on Vision 308, when we talk about new curriculum, that those dollars are in the budget that Dr. Petsky just presented.
Okay.
Jennifer.
I have a couple of questions and then just kind of a thought. So when we improved this one-page document, now we're kind of seeing how it is drawn out, and I greatly appreciate it. And I don't know if I'm probably getting a little micro instead of staying macro, but something very important to me, at least, is student efficacy. And as you know, Faith, I love to talk Hattie with you. Mm-hmm. Are we, when we're talking about expand opportunities for students to have choice, challenge, and success through differentiating and personalization, is that also student-led, student-driven when we're talking choice, when we're talking meaning? If I set my goals, I'm more likely to achieve them with support from my teacher versus if my teacher is setting the goals and so forth. That student efficacy is so important, and I kind of thought maybe it was included in there, but I just don't physically see it. So am I getting too macro, too micro?
No, we can talk all you want on those types of things, but we've just done learning target training with our junior high staff and are getting ready to do it. We've done with the department chairs, and a big part of that is sharing up front what we want students to learn and then building in time for them to reflect on their own to know whether they've mastered it. So one of the key things that, if we're not careful, happens is that students sit back and wait until a teacher grades them or a teacher says they've given feedback.
Yeah.
But then as an adult, if I sit through a meeting and I'm going to wait until Dr. Sparlin says, I'm going to give you a grade, Faith, and I haven't been saying, well, wait, I don't know if I understand this enough to get up and train. You have to be monitoring that. So we want to train our students to be able to do that as well. And then you're absolutely right. There's a big difference between differentiation and personalization. A differentiation is when a teacher provides a variety of opportunities to really match the levels. Personalization is I chose what I wanted to learn about, and it's going to be important that we do both of those things.
It's so important, and I think just student overall, whether it's student-led efficacy in the classroom, student voice through our ambassadors, just really having the district driven by students is really important, I think, to our success overall. And then I have a question for you, and then I have one last comment, but this is a lot to undertake. And even if you have everything, endless money, endless time, can we do, what I prefer that we do is a few things really well versus everything at 30, 40, 50%. So if there's, I just want to make sure that when we're moving forward, we're not setting ourselves up for failure. So that's just a comment. And then the thing that I don't think the entire Envision 308 is capturing, and I think we need to step back for a second, is that what we are going through now, and we're entering year 3 of the pandemic, is going to become endemic. This isn't going away. COVID's not going away. We're going to be dealing with this for the next probably 20 years until it becomes like the flu, right? I think we need built-in processes for how we're going to handle school shutdowns, stuff like that. Really like disaster preparedness, I think is very important, and I think we need to see that somehow in one of those 4. And I'm sorry I didn't think about that when we approved this. It didn't hit me until literally just tonight. But this is something that's going to affect us for a long time. We might see a specific elementary school shut down because it's going to take longer for them down the road to, you know, vaccines or what have you. So I think that we need somewhere in this Envision 308 just some sort of idea that this is going to affect us more, or the things are going to affect us with COVID than just trying to be reactive to it. We know it's here, we know it's staying, and it's not going away. So those are just my thoughts. Thank you. Faith and your team just done a phenomenal job. And I wish we could give you all the time and money we need to make it happen.
I got a real quick teacher perspective for you.
Sure.
I'm worried about over-assessing. I'm really worried about over-assessing. I'm also worried a lot about reading and where our kids are at reading. And in particular, now that we have the ESSER funds, and I know that Faith and I have kind of talked a little bit more at length about these Erlin screenings, but we got to start thinking outside of the box about how to get these kids to read, because I will tell you that if they can't read the test, our scores aren't going to go up. So, you know, and Faith is kind of more, you know, elementary, but I think that needs to go across the board. So I think we need to start looking at using our ESSER funds for that. And then I have zero interest in buying materials that teachers aren't going to use. Like, I know that sometimes at a district level, like those really thick language arts junior high books that all of the Swanson boys used 1 or 2 pages out of. And I imagine that we spend a pretty large amount of money for those. So in the world where we're 1-to-1, I don't know that we need to consider buying textbooks. I think that we need to consider what's best for kids may not always be a textbook.
And the curriculum review process does take that into effect of what we're talking about is when you do need to provide that piece. And I've also heard the concerns about Springboard that you're talking about. When you said the over-assessing piece, we're trying to do some less of the big assessment pieces and have it be more off of, for example, with the literacy framework, when the teacher reads with a small group of students, really getting in and knowing, for example, which of the phonics they are able to do. Are they able to look through for context clues? But basing that instruction, you know, off of those pieces. So I don't think it's an over-assessment, but it's about really noticing and knowing each student's strengths and weaknesses, and then gearing instruction toward that.
All right, so again, from a teacher perspective, when you guys are doing your walkthroughs, if you're walking through and seeing a kid doing something on that one time at that one day, I'm not sure that gives you enough information about those kids. Like, I see where you're
Right.
going with it, and I
So-
understand it, but.
Right, and I don't want you to think that the classroom walkthroughs are gonna give me individual student data. They're not even gonna give me individual teacher data. And gone through and done this at a number of large districts now, and you're going through and you're looking for levels of engagement. You're looking and seeing, and I ask the students, you know, what is it that you're learning today? Do they know what the learning target is? And, you know, if I walk through and do 40 classrooms in the time that I'm there, I get a pretty good sense of how we're doing. And when I talk about the classroom walkthroughs, it's really an evaluation of me, and it's an evaluation of our team on how we're providing the professional development for teachers. It's kind of like that formative assessment piece for teachers that they use with students of how am I doing with my instruction. We're going to observe instruction to know how we're doing at supporting our teachers and learning what we want them to do. So it's not at all, and I know some teachers will be nervous because here comes the associate superintendent in the classroom, but it's really an evaluation of how we're doing and getting a sense. It's not.
Well, I think that's an important message, and I think it's a culture thing too, that we
It
have to
is.
build up to it, and that's not something that's gonna happen. Like, a lot of teachers will not let anybody in their classroom.
Right, and
You
that's,
know?
I've already shared the message about the purpose and those things early on in August with the staff newsletter and met with the union, going around and talking to the department chairs and key leaders so that they know the purpose behind that. And we purposely, when we do the classroom walkthroughs, don't have the principals from those schools go with us. So it's less of an evaluation of feel of for a teacher as it is an evaluation of the district on how we're moving forward in the instruction that we want. But your concerns are very valid. I've done this before, and some people are like, I don't want her in my room, you know, not here yet. But it's an important part of the process. I can't, in good conscience, say from DAC that I know exactly what's going on in classrooms without being in classrooms and getting around and seeing how we're doing.
Ruth?
I get to go next. Okay. I have, some of my questions were already answered by other board members, so I just, I don't know if it's necessarily a question or more of a comment and a concern. On slide 3, when it talked about using creativity, I think if you look at the personality type of an average teacher, you're going to have a type A but extremely creative person. And I hope that I love the words that I'm hearing and the things that I'm hearing. It sounds great, and I hope that we can do it. I know particularly, I'm just going to use an example at the junior high language arts level because it's something I'm familiar with, is we're not doing that. My understanding is we're telling teachers, this is your curriculum, you have to get to these points at these times, you have to do this book, and you can't have any flexibility. I remember when my oldest was in junior high, before we adopted our new curriculum, it was, okay, we're going to learn about dystopian stuff. So you need to, as a student, pick a dystopian novel and read that, and the teacher provided instruction based on the topic they were learning, and not like, okay, everybody has to open this specific book and read this book, whether you like it or not. Too bad, this is what we're doing, because that's the curriculum, and this is what we're, not necessarily what the teacher wants to do, but that's what they're being told they have to do. And I just think when we're talking about literacy, we're losing kids by the droves. I know my children do not like to be told what to do. And if they had some freedom in, like, here's the topic, but you can pick, if you don't know what to pick, I can help you. I hope that I feel like that's something we can implement now. We don't have to wait for another type of curriculum. We just have to maybe change.
Right, we have to walk the balance. I talk about it in tight and loose. Like, there are tight that are standards that our kids have to learn, especially in literacy and math, especially at the younger grades. It's not optional to teach fractions.
Right.
You know, like, you have to do that. But in the manner of the materials, even the resource that we choose isn't I don't think a mandate that all teachers have to use it. I had a great fraction unit when I was a teacher. I didn't use a textbook at all. And you have to be able to do those pieces and allow for those teacher strengths and also student strengths and pieces. So it's harder to monitor and support that, but it is the right thing to do. I'm not a believer that on the second Tuesday in October we're all going to be on page, like nobody wants to teach that way. I don't think. I wouldn't want to learn that way as well, but we can't have it be so loose that somebody decides that they're not going to teach fractions. Sure. So when you talk about how do we have that choice in the literacy framework, there's time for independent reading and small group that is student chosen text off of what that looks like. In math, when you look at what are those skills, one of the greatest things that we can do is have students write problems that show that they understand the math concept behind that. The new science standards with NGSS is much more about inquiry than it is the actual content pieces, and the social studies standards that we need to move to and getting into are not as much content, have you memorized the capitals, have you done all of those things, but can you draw connections so you can use a variety of ways like what you're talking about to get to the same mastery of skills for those pieces. So some of that is allowing our staff to have some of that freedom, but also keeping tight on making sure that it doesn't turn into just projects without skill mastery.
I understand what you're saying, and maybe we can talk outside of this about like more specifically what my concern might be. But then I also had I just want to make a comment. At the last, I used to be on the Finance and Facilities Committee, great committee. At one of the ones we had last year, towards the end of the year, we did go over a presentation, an update of our facility needs, and it included pictures and dollars. So I'm hoping that you guys got that and you're not starting all over again. It was very helpful.
Yeah, no, we're actually, we've got that from the architects, and Rob put a lot of that together. So we are using the Vision 2020 plan to build on to that next wave, pictures and all, so you can see what we're talking about and what those pictures are. And Dr. Sparlin shared a PowerPoint with me that included the same information.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Ruth.
I guess it's my turn. First, I just want to thank everyone for the enormous amount of hours that went into putting this together. It does seem like a very huge undertaking, and I think all of my colleagues up here have asked great questions. I do want to say that as far as the finance and facilities piece, I'm really eager for us to explore those new opportunities for revenue, whether that's grants or businesses or other partnerships.
And you know what, Heidi reminded me too in her presentation, she talked about the Alumni Association. We've had many alumni talk to us and say, hey, is there somewhere where I could donate? I want to give to my high school alma mater. So we are looking at that as well. Yeah,
and that's fantastic, because we are going to need the continued revenue in order to make these things happen, in order to have the team and the staff that we need. And I do understand our community's feel about paying, having 71% come from them. So I think that is something that does need to be a priority in order to make these things happen. I'm very excited to see the literacy and math achievement on here. I think that's crucial as well. And I just, to Eugene's point, I think it's very important that we have meaningful ways to measure and to report back to our community and obviously to the board. I'm wondering too, and I'm not sure if this was included, so I apologize if it was, but what is the plan for reporting back this information about how we're doing to both the board and to our community?
So at the next board meeting, we are going to be talking about a dashboard. And that is not only looking at test scores and things, but it is a piece of adding the calendar of board reports. So every year there would be an English learner report. Every year there would be a professional development report. And we would go through together as kind of the plan, but we'll need your input as well. And at the end of that, say, okay, here are the things that we said we would accomplish this year. Are we making adequate progress? Are we hitting it out of the park? Are we status quo? And kind of color coding that so that as those reports come to be, you can look on a one page from the community and look in colors. Are everything looking good? Is this an area that we really need to work on? And it would be looking at some of the financial pieces with that, but also looking at student achievement, looking at our graduation rates, but also some of the softer pieces of the implementation of the framework. Are we where we said, where we would be? So to tell the story, I think you not only need numbers, but you need the narrative behind that. And then that dashboard, we're thinking about having the links to the board presentations that we make. So if somebody wants to really get in and see, here was the literacy framework piece, here was all of that. So they see some of the supporting documents that go into all of the things that we want to accomplish by 2026 and have our mile markers along the way.
And
so that's the next meeting.
Okay. Is the dashboard only annual, or is that something that comes out?
The dashboard, we envision it being, I'm using the word envision a lot, envision on the district website permanently, all the time. And it would be updates. If you think back to the calendar of board reports, if our professional development report is always April, that section of the dashboard would be updated every April. When we're talking about the budget, if that was going to be updated, that part of it would be updated during that board report time. All of the state student achievement comes usually on Halloween, so November you'd have a lot of that part of the dashboard updated. So it would be a continually changing place that is permanently part of the district website.
Okay, terrific.
I have just one more comment, because you kind of hit my last comment, or you mentioned it, but you're talking about the implementation of it, and typically a strategy has a communication strategy that overlays it, and there are so many layers to what you're talking about. And earlier you mentioned that if it's not implemented well, then it may not work simply because it wasn't being done. And so I think perception is reality, not only for the board, the district, the staff. And so I think that it's going to be so important that we have a communication strategy so that every layer of this plan is communicated, not only as who needs to know what, but by when.
Right.
And so I think for the district, the superintendent, employees, schools, students, parents, and then the community, we have to, I think, simultaneously as we're creating this plan, we have to also outline who needs to know what by when, so that as we're implementing it, and what do they need to know, because as we're implementing it, that way people are getting information in a timely manner, they can process it, and then when they're ready or it's time to actually implement it, we can ensure that they understand it prior to us implementing it and then finding out that they don't get it, and now we have to do a bunch of rework. So I don't know if it's the communications department's responsibility, but I think that we have to make sure that simultaneously while we're doing Envision 308, that it's not something that is also on your backs to do that, but that it's a partnership within communications so that we can have segmented communications for all of those areas across the district.
Right, and I think one of the pieces that will help with that is the Climate for Learning framework, because the Climate for Learning framework kind of has all of this in it. It has the expectations around instruction, the framework, the SEL pieces, the equity pieces, the amplification of student voice, to have all of that in there. So when we talk at the school level and the district level about school improvement plans and district improvement plans, we're wanting everybody to tie that into Climate for Learning framework. So as we update and provide that communication, the more that we can have that one tool that shows how all of these pieces fit into doing that, and then the budget and all of that will be very helpful. But it is the hope to have that Climate for Learning really show all of these pieces, how it ties together. But you are exactly right that a huge amount of our job as we're trying to improve all of this instruction is communication, because that goes to the culture piece, that goes to trust, and I could really spend a full-time job just sending emails and making videos and talking about what it is we're going to do and what it is we've already done. And yes.
Agreed.
Well, and I think it's just to reiterate what Eugene said, you live in this every day, all day, and parents can't always listen at board meetings, don't always know where to find things because they have to go to that date. Having that dashboard and then a communication strategy to explain why this is coming out when will really will go a long way with transparency with the community, with what we're trying to implement. And again, like you said, Eugene, time to process. Even as a newer board member, it takes a lot to process all of this. But when you're on the other side of it in the community, it's even harder because they don't have direct, I mean, they do have direct access to you, but fewer people reach out. So I think also if there can be a two-way part of that dashboard where people can send you, whoever it might be, if you click here, it goes to the appropriate person to get their questions answered, that would be helpful as well.
Is there any more discussion on this topic? Good. Okay, so we'll move on to action items. We have 8.1, approval of resolution calling for a public hearing on the FY22 budget. Do we need to have any discussion on this? No. Great. Can I get a motion for the approval of resolution calling for a public hearing on the FY22 budget?
I make a motion to approve a resolution calling for a public hearing on the FY22 tentative budget and place it on file for public inspection until the public hearing for said budget on the 27th day of September.
Second.
Mrs. Croner,
Aye.
Dr. Marino,
Aye.
Mrs. Johnson,
Aye.
Mr. Gatewood,
Aye.
Mrs. Swanson,
Aye.
Mrs. Simulton.
Aye.
Motion passes 6-0. 8.2, approval of driver's education vehicles agreement. Is there any discussion needed on this topic? No. Can I get a motion for the approval of driver's education vehicles agreement?
I make a motion to approve the driver's education vehicle lease agreement with Enterprise Fleet Management as presented.
Second.
Mr. Gatewood,
Aye.
Mrs. Johnson,
Aye.
Mrs. Swanson,
Aye.
Dr. Marino,
Aye.
Mrs. Simulton,
Aye.
Mrs. Croner.
Aye.
Motion passes 6-0. 8.3, approval of building administrator contracts. Can I get a motion for the approval of building administrator contracts?
I make a motion to approve the building administrator contracts as presented.
Second.
Mrs. Swanson,
Aye.
Mrs. Croner,
Aye.
Mrs. Simulton,
Aye.
Mr. Gatewood,
Aye.
Mrs. Johnson,
Aye.
Dr. Marino.
Aye. Motion passes 6-0. Can I get a motion for 8.4, approval of personnel report?
I make a motion to approve the personnel report as presented and discussed.
Second.
Mr. Gatewood,
Aye.
Mrs. Johnson,
Aye.
Mrs. Swanson,
Aye.
Dr. Marino,
Aye.
Mrs. Simulton,
Aye.
Mrs. Croner.
Aye.
Motion passes 6-0. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
I make a motion to adjourn.
Second.